Hi, and welcome to this special edition of The Right Stuff. I'm the Queen, Parker J. Thanks for joining me. I have been telling you all, dear listener, about this wonderful anthology I've been a part of called A Time for Everything, a speculative fiction anthology inspired by Ecclesiastes 3. Today I have with me the creator of that anthology and the editor, Ben Avery from Onward and Upward Media. Ben, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me, Parker. This is super exciting to be able to talk with you about this.
What was so exciting about this anthology is that as soon as people heard the premise of this idea, everyone went, of course, why didn't we think of that before? So I would love to get behind the scenes of what made you say, I want to collate a series of stories around Ecclesiastes 3.
Well, so I've only talked about this a couple of times, but my original plan was I was just going to do this by myself. I was going to do 28 different time travel stories by myself. I had just finished Ghost of the Future, my first novel, and I was like, this would be great. This would be great. And the idea being, I was reading Ecclesiastes and taking a look at that, A Time for Everything, and the whole poem there, Ecclesiastes 3, and it was just like, this is the breadth of human existence. And that's what science fiction does, right? Science fiction talks about human existence. And I was just thinking, we could get, I use this analogy a lot for a lot of different things, but it's like that classic commercial. You got chocolate in my peanut butter, you got peanut butter in my chocolate, and together they taste great. And that was where I was like, what if I use that as the launching point? But then I realized very, very quickly, I'm never going to get this done if I do it all by myself. And I was also thinking it would be really cool to get other people involved, because that's another thing that I like to do is I'm not necessarily the greatest cheerleader, but I do my best. I do my best and I try. And I'm like, this is an opportunity for me to take what little capital I have and try and spread it a little bit and get people involved and hopefully get people like me who have something else that they're hoping that people are going to be aware of, maybe a novel or maybe a bunch of novels like you, or maybe it's even someone who's just getting started, who just needs some encouragement, just to say, hey, you've got some talent. Let's let you foster. Let's foster that a little bit. And so that's why I was like, well, this would be a great way to just we could open this up. We could get other people involved. I could get other voices in this thing, so it's not just Ben Avery. And that's when I kind of went out and started, like, I passed it through a couple different people. Like, do you like this idea? What do you think about this? And then after I vetted it a little bit with some people, I spread it out there and recruited some people specifically and went after a few people specifically, and then also put out a broader net for just to catch people that I don't know, because I don't know everybody, But that's really, it just comes down to what Ecclesiastes 3 was saying about life, and saying about just how there's all these things and they happen and there's a time for them and there's a purpose for them. And let's explore that in science fiction. And so I also expanded it beyond just time travel to the phrase I've been using most recently is to time bending. Like it has to be something about time. It has to be a fantastic science fiction use of time, but it had to do with time in that way. And then also had to use that a time to hate, a time to kill, a time to be born, a time to heal, all these different phrases. That's your launching point. That's your mission statement, so to speak, that you're starting with, and then go from there, build a story.
When you were collating the stories and getting people's pitches and getting their ideas, was it a really daunting task? Like you said, did I bite off more than I can chew?
Yeah, I did, because it's so big. There's 28 of these things. And that's something I've told you guys, the group, in some of our group chats. I've said, hey, next one is not going to be this big. I'm just warning you right now, because I can't. There was 28 stories, and some of them were short, some of them were yours, but
yeah.
But it was just the kind of thing where it had to be this big. I thought about splitting it up into two, but I really didn't like that idea because I wanted them all together. Another thing I thought about doing was just doing 14 stories. So everyone's story would be like A Time to Love, A Time to Hate. That would be the story title or your beginning point. But I really like the idea of just those each, because it's a couplet. And so they're paired up. But I also like the idea of breaking those out. And so Time for Peace and A Time for War could have been one story. together, but instead it was 2 stories. And so we do have a massive collection now. I mean, it's 500 some pages. This is also the first thing I've edited like this before. And that was also daunting. And then it was also daunting because some of the writers were very, very polished in what they gave me. And some of the writers, it was, clearly this is an early draft. And so I'm helping shepherd that early draft into something, publishing worthy. And so there was just, I didn't know what I was going to get from the different writers. A lot of the people I didn't know well. A couple people I'm good friends with that are in this project, but most people are either acquaintances or absolute strangers before this started. Like I had no idea who this person was other than maybe I saw their name show up on a post in a Facebook group.
Yeah. And we know how we can really attach ourselves to a profile name, but we don't really know the people behind it.
Yeah.
And now, after this project, one thing I could definitely say is that we have created a inkhood, if you will. And I feel like we are the onward and upward magnificent 29 because there's 29 authors and 28 stories, dear listener. And I even told Ben, I said, we are the original G's right now. So he has some more projects we'll talk about a little bit later in our show here. But, you have this concept, you have all these authors, but the diversity of stories in this collection, I think it made it worthwhile because you can open this book and you're going to have these different voices telling really interesting takes on this beautiful poem that has lasted throughout the ages. What was that like for you as you were collating this all together?
That was probably the most exciting part of it, Parker, was to have all these different voices and all these different styles, but not just styles. You mentioned approaches, and so you had some people who were like, I am primarily a sci-fi writer, but I'm going to try fantasy, or I am primarily a sci-fi writer, so that's what I'm going to do. Or I am primarily a romance writer, and so I'm going to put some sci-fi in this, but it's a romance story, and so to see all these different things, all the different takes, some of these are big, broad, kind of space empire stories where it's a big, broad science fiction world that gets created. And there's one, I throw this out as an example. There's one that takes place on a chicken farm.
Yeah.
And so that's where this anthology really does remind me of Twilight Zone, because Twilight Zone, you have one episode that's about a woman who has a tiny alien spacecraft invading her little house. And in the next episode, it's about just a guy who's down on his luck, who's just trying to get a job. And then the next episode is about a time traveler. And then the next episode, and there's just all these different things. And it's sci-fi, it's space epic, it's fantasy. And that's the same kind of thing here. The one difference would be, I don't think I saw too much, if any, that I can remember, high fantasy in Twilight Zone. And I think it's more of a budget thing than anything else. But Twilight Zone tended to be, science fiction or urban fantasy, or historical fantasy. There's some Westerns episodes and that kind of thing. But here there is a couple different stories where it is more high fantasy. They're picking up swords. They're there's one that has mythological creatures and different things like that. So that was what was most exciting to me, was to see these kind of these domestic dramas, these straight time travel stories, the space epic, and the antediluvian fiction. I mean, there's just all these different genres, styles, moods, tones, and it just, I think, makes for a beautiful collection. And there is something for everyone in this book. There is a different style of story that you can latch onto. My daughter is reading it right now. She just finished yours, Parker. She really liked it. But she's reading it right now. And I know there's going to be a couple that she's like, that doesn't connect with me because it's so, it's so broad. The good thing is all 28 connected with me. So that's the
whole point. That's the whole point too, because you do get that diversity, and that happens a lot in anthologies. And in your foreword to this anthology, you do talk about your love for anthologies and how anthologies introduce you to different authors.
Yeah.
Because you get the opportunity to get a taste of an author's style, and then most of the time you're going to want to see what else they're writing. For example, I talked to Kaylina Radcliffe, and I had never heard of her before. I had never read a book by her, but I read her short story in this, which is A Time to Embrace. And when I read that story, I told her, my gosh, I want to read what you are writing. I told her that. I said, because I absolutely loved it. And then thankfully, she did say she was going to use that as a jumping point for a novel. And I told her, I will read your typos. So you don't have to even fix it for me. That's how much I want to read it. And dear listener, I'm really excited about this anthology because of the fact that you're going to be introduced to different authors. One of the stories that I also liked in this one too was a very odd one that was really good. And that was A Time to Kill. Now, I don't want to give away the spoilers for this, so we'll keep it kind of vague, Ben. But A Time to Kill was really interesting. I still thought about that story a week after I had read it because it was such a unique idea. And there's hardly any lines of dialogue, and yet you're captivated by the author's writing style. And as you were reading the stories, these various stories, I know you're probably like, I wouldn't have thought of it that way. But you did. That's the best part. This anthology has something for everyone. And in each story, there is some sort of gospel truth that is being interwoven in the tale, whether overtly or subtly.
Yeah. Time to Kill is written by my buddy Evan. Like, he and I are really close friends. Like, we babysit his children.
Oh, good.
Yeah. We don't now. He moved away from Indiana, but he's also my co-host on Strangers and Aliens. We haven't done an episode in a while, but he's a really close friend of mine. And that one, it did. Yeah. When he sent me the original idea, I was like, I don't know how you're going to do it, but sounds good. Let's give it a shot. And he did it, and it worked. Clearly it worked for you. And so, yeah, his take on it, it goes into that, it had to do with time. It had to do with this kind of fantastic time element, but not at all what you'd have expected, especially with that title. Like a title like A Time to Kill, and the low-hanging fruit here is, okay, I got a guy who's going back in time, he's going to try and kill someone, or something like that, And he took a high
concept. High concept with this, and I'm here all for it. And dear listener, you will be too when you pick up your copy of A Time for Everything, a speculative fiction anthology inspired by Ecclesiastes 3, edited by my good friend Ben Avery from Onward and Upward Media. Now, I want people to get to know a little bit about you as well. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so right now I live in Indiana. I'm a children's pastor. I've got 5 kids of my own. 3 of them are college age, and one of them is middle school, and one is just finishing high school this semester. And so that's kind of the overview of who I am right now, and what I do right now. But I'm also a writer and a storyteller. I have been since I've been able to put words together. I've known I wanted to be a story. Actually, maybe even before that, because when Superman the movie came out, I was 3 and I was there for it. I actually I don't remember going to the movie as much as I remember sitting in the living room. The commercial came on TV, and my dad said, "You want to go see that?" And I was like, "What?" And so and that was I remember that so vividly. And then he went with work with people from his group home that he worked for, and I went with that group, and so he knew he was going to go, and he knew he was going to bring me, but he knew I loved Superman and Star Wars and all of that, and so maybe even before I knew how to tell stories, I was captivated by stories. And so it's always been a part of just what I've done. I'm one of those writers, and there's a lot of us out there who wrote that really awful novel in high school. I'm one of those writers who just that's my hobby, and I love doing it. And so in my spare time, what am I doing? I'm writing down ideas for stories. I'm writing stories. Now it's my side hustle, so to speak, because I'm a full-time pastor. For a while, it was my full-time occupation, being a freelance writer. That was a very difficult time because there were times when my publishers weren't paying me, and we had to live on next to nothing. And so, but storytelling has always been just in my DNA. It comes from my dad, who is a pastor as well. And when he preaches, he does 3 points. He does a 3-point sermon, but his sermons are stories. His sermons are taking stories from the Bible and using those, but then also taking concepts from the Bible. Like if he's preaching out of James, he's got stories he's going to tell. And that's always been a part of the way I do things as well as a pastor. And so it's all in what I do. I've written for many different publishers, but primarily with comic books and graphic novels. And so I got started self-publishing a couple comics, and then I worked with George R.R. Martin on The Hedge Knight, which is a graphic novel based on his novella series that takes place before Game of Thrones, 100 years before. I call it his Hobbit because it takes place before and it's a lot shorter. And I did 3 graphic novels in that series, and that opened doors for me to be able to work for Zondervan. That got me on the Marvel payroll for a little while. That got me involved with Kingstone, which is, I call Kingstone my patron because they're the ones who, for the longest time, they just had job after job after job after job that I was doing while I was that freelance writer. I've written for animation, for a series called Ought to Be Good. I've written some stage plays. I mean, it's just what I do. I love writing. I haven't done too many novels. I've published one novel. I did do a novella series, a series of 6 novellas that go along with one of my comic book properties that I have called Armor Quest, but that hasn't been published. And so, I mean, no matter what you call that, even though I wrote it first, it's not my first published novel. Ghosts of the Future definitely is. But that's like I said, writing is in my DNA. Like a lot of you out there, it's just something that I do. It's something I love. And right now, I haven't had much comic book work, and so writing Ghosts of the Future was kind of trying to explore, like, who am I now? I used to call myself a comic book writer, and what do you call yourself when there's no more comics to write? Well, I don't know. And so so I was kind of reinventing myself, working on something with Ghosts of the Future. It was something that was not for a publisher. It was just for myself. And so I wasn't answering to anybody. I was just writing the book I wanted to write instead of, Kingstone came to me and said, "Hey, we need Job. Can you write Job for us?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love to. I've always wanted to do that." But it was always a publisher coming and saying, "Hey, we need this from you. Can you give it to us?" And Ghosts of the Future was me saying, "What do I want to do? What story do I want to tell?" And so that's kind of my writing story in a jumbled nutshell. So.
Well, no, it goes to what your motivations are and how the Lord has used these sparser moments right now for you to bring a bunch of authors together and really get them excited about a time for everything. And you did write a story in here, and it's called A Time to Hate. And when people hear that, they're probably thinking, oh, it's probably going to be about. And one thing, dear listener, I want you to know is that whatever you think these stories are going to be about, they're not. So I think most of the authors effectively subverted your expectations in a good way. And so in your story, A Time to Hate, what's going on for our character?
Well, my starting point for A Time to Hate was just exploring, biblically, what does this mean? Because, and I even brought this up with my kids and told them which one it was. And they're like, really? So there's a time to hate? And I'm like, well, yeah, but, and in a nutshell, the question is, what is it appropriate to hate? And so there was a couple podcasts I listened to on my walks and read some articles and looked at some biblical, I can't remember what they call it now, but the commentary, that's the word I'm looking for, some biblical commentary, and just kind of exploring, okay, so what does this mean? A time to hate. And that's what I wanted to do, as I wanted to explore what does it mean in my story. And so it does bring up people hating people, and it does kind of explore that. But it really, the question that it's asking is, what is it appropriate and what is it okay? And why is there a time to hate? And I think, why is there a time to hate? The question is answered with another question: what is it that you're hating? And as you answer that question, then you can answer, is this actually a time to hate? And, and getting into the biblical answer again, it's really, what does God hate? And because there are some clear things in Scripture that God hates and clear things that God wants us to stand against, because it's not, because he's holy and it goes against that part of his character. And so anyway, that was my kind of starting point, but the story evolved over time as far as how I was exploring that. but it really is. It's set in my Slipstream. I call it the Slipstream universe. That's what Ghost of the Future is the first story that I did in the Slipstream universe. Maybe I should do something that's a little less of a tongue twister. But yeah. Slipstream. But it's too late now. It's already in print. But and so it's part of that story. It's actually the same crew of characters, but a different point of view character. So the point of view character in Ghost of the Future is Edgar, who's in my story, Time to Hate. But the point of view character is Tor, and she's a former soldier, and she's had so many things taken away from her, and she's lost so many things. And the time travel element, I'm not going to get into that. I don't want to spoil that. But the idea that gets brought up here is she's having to kind of explore and confront the loss that she's had in the past in the context of potential loss of her new family now in the present day that she has on this ship called the Tabitha. And that crew is like a family, and that ship is her new home, and that it becomes a place for people to come, and it is a new home that's very accepting for people who can't find a place where they fit in. And so she's found this place where she fits in after having lost her entire family and lost everything she loved, and having, a few years of kind of wandering. And now there's a risk of losing that again. And so now she has to confront her feelings about the people who are causing that risk to happen. But then she's also confronting how she's been dealing with her feelings about losing her family. And it does, again, dive into, like, what is it okay to hate? And I'll throw this out there, though. There are there's an alien intelligence who kind of helps her because she helps them. And there's some, hopefully some big sci-fi ideas and some fun sci-fi ideas. And yeah, I enjoyed writing it. And it takes place a little bit after Ghost of the Future.
And so if people want to connect with you, Ben, where can they find you online?
They can find me, the easiest place, and it's kind of the central hub, is benavery.com. That's my main website. It's not the greatest website, but it does, I think, get you where you need to go. It gets you to my online store. It gets you to my podcast. Strangers and Aliens is one podcast about science fiction Christianity. Welcome to Level 7 is a podcast about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Comic Book Time Machine is a podcast that I do on occasion, where it's definitely the most hobbyist of all my hobby podcasts, where I'm when I read a comic book that I really like, I talk about it on there. And then there's Up From the Ashes, which is a podcast that you were on, where we talk about The Star Lost, a lost sci-fi TV show from the 70s. But those are all linked to from my website, benavery.com. And there's also on Facebook, facebook.com/BenAvery Storyteller. You can follow me there. And on Instagram, I'm the same. It's Ben Avery Storyteller on Instagram. Those are probably the easiest places, though. It's just the Ben Avery branding. benavery.com, Ben Avery Storyteller on Facebook, Ben Avery Storyteller on Instagram.
Well, I'm really glad you took time to be here with me, Ben. I really appreciate it. And I hope, dear listener, as you were listening to our conversation, you pick up your copy of A Time for Everything. There is a story for everyone in this wonderful collection of 28 stories and 29 authors. I know you're going to be so excited. And the first story is my story, so you can pick it up. And what's really funny about that is that I had no idea that my story would be the first story. And when I saw it, dear listener, I told Ben, I said, "Oh, my story is the first one." And he said, "Well, yeah, you chose the verse."
It's in order. It's in order.
I did that, and I felt so ridiculous about it. I said, "Of course, it's the first one." And I just felt like, okay, and I felt no pressure at all. But so far, the response has been phenomenal with it, and Ben gave me the great honor of being part of this wonderful project, and I thank you for that, Ben, because it's really invigorated me on a writerly level to kind of delve some more of my own take into certain sci-fi tropes, and that I've always enjoyed but never really thought I could explore on my own. So really excited to be doing that. And I think I told you I'm going to be doing it under my grandmother's pen name. So I'm really looking forward to that. Her book will be coming out. It will happen. Will be coming out in December of this year. Lord willing, doesn't happen. So, but dear listener, thank you for being with me on this special edition of The Right Stuff. Ben, thank you for being with me as well. I can't wait to have you back and have you back soon. And dear listener, you have a wonderful, absolutely glorious, blessed day. God bless.